Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. This week's parasha is going to be Parashat Beshalach. And I want to ask you all a really fundamental, serious question about this parasha and about a large portion of the Torah in general. Something that perhaps doesn't come to the minds of many, or maybe it does, I don't know. But when you think about it, it's like I don't even know. It's like I just can't describe it. The question is so big. And this is how it is. So, we look at the very beginning of this parasha, and Hashem decides that when He finally takes the Jewish people out of Egypt, He says, you know what? I'm not going to bring them the normal way to Israel. As the pasuk says, I'm not going to bring them to Derech Eretz Pelishtim. I'm not going to bring them the way of the land of the Philistines. As we know, the Philistines lived in Israel. They were basically, in a very big sense, a very powerful nation of Israel. But God is saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to bring them that way. No. I'm going to bring them a different way. And the pasuk says, because perhaps when the Israelites, they're going to go, they're going to see war, they're going to have to do war with the Philistines, and then they'll go back to Egypt, to V'shavu Mitzrayma. Now, at first glance it makes sense. But when you think about it, it's like, I don't know. Because, after all, why should they go back to Egypt? They were slaves there for so long. They were being, I don't have words. Like, the amount of terrible stuff going on to the Jews in the time of Egypt was so serious, and it was for so long, that it's almost unthinkable that they're finally saved by God's hand. They finally get salvation. And, but maybe they're going to go back. How are they going to go back? What do you mean they're going to go back? They just saw the 10 plagues of Egypt that were all miraculous. Our sages tell us, for all of them, that the Jews weren't affected. The Bible itself tells us that for some of them, they were not affected. And so, in other words, you see all this miraculous events happen and unfold right before your eyes. You see that there is a God. You legit see it. And now God is finally taking you out. And not only that, if you look further in the parasha, it says that God led us with a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud. And He did all sorts of things to protect us. And it's possible that the Jews are going to go back to Egypt? Does this bother you? What is the Torah really saying? And so this is what I think is really being said. You see, we know that Egypt was Irvat Haaretz. We know that Egypt, that Mitzrayim, was a terrible place with such terrible morals and terrible ideology. And the truth is that rubbed off on the Jews, to the point where our sages tell us that the only thing that kept the Jews back then really Jewish was they didn't change their names, their clothing, and their language. But otherwise, they served who knows what idols. They weren't the most moral people. They weren't the most appropriate people to use such a language. And it really rubbed off. They were there for so long. Egypt was like the most powerful nation. Well, what else would they do, honestly? It was unfortunate. But you see, the thing is, because it rubbed off on them, because it unfortunately made the Jews of that time those type of people, there was no reason why they couldn't have come back to the evil. Because the thing is, this evil that we're speaking of course it comes from Satan, of course it comes from the Yetzer Hara. And there's no reason why the Yetzer Hara can't convince someone to come back. Especially when a person was steeped into it. Especially when a person was addicted to this sort of way of living. And so, what had to happen? What had to happen was Kriyat Yatsuf. What had to happen was the splitting of the Red Sea, where the Jews see yet another miraculous event. But at the end of it, the point is, they see that all the Egyptians, they get drowned in the sea, right before their eyes. Not only that, I think it's that our sages tell us, the Jews, they got so much riches and wealth from that event also, from the army of Pharaoh, however that happened. But the point is that they had to see Egypt fall before their eyes. They had to see all the power that Egypt has, as the Bible said that Pharaoh took his entire army, and they had to see it be crushed. Because if they didn't, there's no reason why they wouldn't have come back. You see, the thing is, if we look at the first pasuk, as we mentioned, that maybe they're going to see war, so they'll come back to Egypt. the thing is, it doesn't make sense in that the Jews, they did eventually see war. They went to war with the Amorites and a bunch of other things, the Amalekites. So then what's really going on? It must be what the Torah really meant to say was that, yeah, the point is they must see Egypt crushed before their eyes. And so for us, this means that when we have evil that's in our lives, or if we were going by evil, and maybe that's too harsh of a word, but if we are doing things incorrectly, and if we are too steeped into that way, the only way that we're going to come to a point where we will not come back, the only way it will be certain that even if we see more wars in our life, in other words, even if we're trying to become better people, and within that process, we see wars, i.e., we have hardships, right? The Jews were being led by God in the wilderness, but they had wars and they had hardships. But the only way for us personally that we're gonna be assured that we're not gonna go back is when we see in our eyes that evil has been completely nullified. When we can finally see the truth of how God sees bad things. It was when the Israelites could see how God treated the Egyptians, how He looked down on them. And they saw it before their eyes. That's what was able to affect them finally, that they won't be such people anymore. And that's what we got to realize. When we are able to come to a place where we say, you know what, evil doesn't mean anything. In other words, what I really mean is watching inappropriate movies, which, I mean, is just a classic example. Going out with the wrong friends. That this is not something that has any good to it. And this is something that God will and essentially does crush in this world and in other people's lives because He hates it. When we get that, we're going to finally make sure that we do not go back to that. And then we'll finally make sure that we could connect to God properly. Just like the Israelites, they came to Mount Sinai. And I think that that's the most major message that this entire parasha, this entire section of the Torah is trying to tell us. And so hopefully we'll be able to realize that this is the inyan, that this is the point. That we must look at what we did wrong from before, that it has no use and that it has no help and that it is completely useless and worthless and everything bad. When we get that, then we can connect to God properly and for sure. And so thank you guys for watching this and for listening, and hopefully we will be able to see that, and hopefully we will connect to God in such a way. So thank you guys very much. Shabbat Shalom.